The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
Hey everyone, this is Rose Daly, the City Sustainability Coordinator of Sun Prairie, and you're listening to the Sustainable Sun Prairie Podcast, the show that aspires to educate, empower, and engage our listeners in all aspects of sustainability. Whether you are a seasoned sustainability enthusiast or just beginning your sustainability journey, each episode will have something new and exciting for everyone. Let's begin the conversation for a greener community. Hey everyone, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to take a walk through an urban forest so we can better understand all of the amazing benefits trees provide to us. And those benefits extend beyond shade and cleaner air. We'll also take a deep dive into trees in our built environment and how we can best help them thrive. Now, joining me today is actually an urban and community forester with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, Brian Wall. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. I love talking about trees.
Yes, me too. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Maybe a little stressed because, we're recording things, but
you're going to do great.
Awesome.
Awesome. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So again, my name is Brian Wall, and I am a urban and community forester with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Mainly what I do is I work with municipalities, nonprofits, some tribes, to make sure they understand that they have a resource that needs to be managed, which is our urban forest. And then I can provide some technical assistance, and we also have grants that we can give them so that they can do good things for their forest.
That's so cool. Yeah, knowledge is power. Could you maybe start by defining what is urban forestry? It almost sounds like an oxymoron.
Sure.
But I'd love to know more about it.
No, it definitely is. And a lot of people, when I say urban forests, they think things like, large metropolitan areas, Chicago, New York, LA, Milwaukee, Madison,
Yeah.
But really, for me, there's probably a actual definition for it. But for me, it's anywhere where we have people, we have trees, and we have infrastructure, whether it's buildings or sidewalks or roads, all interacting.
Okay.
That really is, that encompassing space is the urban forest.
Gotcha. So Central Park in New York City would be an example of an urban forest?
Yeah, absolutely. So Central Park would be, but also like the trees outside your, in your backyard, the trees in your front yard, the trees along the streets, the trees in parking lots. Those are all the urban forest. And as you sort of alluded to, a lot of people do think, oh, it's that nature area that we have in town, or it's that, well-wooded park. No, it is all the trees in those urban spaces.
Okay, gotcha.
That is the urban forest.
And then something not an urban forest would be, for example, we go to a national park and there's acres and acres of a forest out there that maybe we don't even have access to, correct? That would be like a natural forest or non-urban?
Yeah, we'd call it maybe a traditional forest.
Traditional forest,
right?
Okay.
And again, it really comes in with the infrastructure and even in those national forests, right? If you the trees maybe, by the park buildings, or in the picnic areas, managed spaces could technically, fall into the same sort of management needs and styles as urban forestry.
Okay, got it. That's awesome. So I now want to move into the benefits associated with trees. So when most people think about the benefits of trees, I think we think about shade. It's a hot day. I'm going to go stand under that tree and cool off. Or we think about cleaner air. We all learned in first grade that trees sequester carbon and release oxygen for us. So I think those are two main benefits a lot of us are familiar with. But could you maybe elaborate on those and share some additional benefits that the average person may not be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So again, the Society of American Forests, they have a bumper sticker that says trees are the answer. And, they do a heck of a lot for us. The list of tree benefits is long. And as a slight aside, the list of tree products that we interact with on a daily basis is extremely long as well.
Do you mean like this wooden chair is a tree product?
I mean this wooden chair is a tree product. I mean the toothpaste used this morning is a tree product.
Whoa, okay.
If you use shredded cheese, technically tree products are in there as well.
No way.
Yeah, so they are everywhere in our life. And so like I said, the list of trees and what they provide us, so long. So probably, again, they are not the answer to all of our woes, but they are certainly a large part of our solution.
Oh, yeah. I had no idea that, like, whenever I think of a tree product, I think of wood, to be honest, wood or paper.
all
But
do.
yeah, you're right. There's like sap in the trees. There's different, probably natural chemicals we can extract from them for different products.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And then the thing that we see a lot of, so we eat trees, we wear trees. So there's a lot of materials that are coming out right now that are tree based. Rayon a long time ago. A lot of that's bamboo now.
Oh, yeah.
But there are, again, other materials that are made from tree pulp, or mostly tree pulp, and are much more sustainable than some of our other products, which is, to me, is fascinating.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Trees provide us with wildlife benefits, homes, habitat, food. Bees, birds, butterflies, and biodiversity are all hot topics that our trees can help us with.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm always surprised, just like if you have a single maple tree in your yard, like a mature maple tree, how many animals, birds, and pollinators like use that as their home or as food.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
But yeah, so they can help out wildlife, but they also help, clean our air. The one thing I like to describe to people is that they're sort of like a dust mop, just sticking up there. Their leaves are working like those little feather dusters, and they're collecting a lot of the particulate matter in the air. So that way, but also they can then channel that. Not only are they capturing it out of the air, they can then channel that down to the soil, so the soil can hopefully manage it, because the soil is a great filter. But also those trees can absorb some of those pollutants. One of those things, I'm not sure if we call it a pollutant necessarily, but things like carbon dioxide. So trees are, during photosynthesis, are taking in carbon dioxide and giving us oxygen. And when they take in that carbon dioxide, that is a greenhouse gas. So that reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that we have out there, and it's locking it up for a much longer term than some other nature things. So for example, we've got the carbon that this tree, I don't know how old this chair is, maybe it's 20 years old, maybe it's 30 years old, but this carbon is still locked up here and will be as long as we have this tree or this floor or that table or the house that you live in. So that's the really cool part about it.
That's super cool. Yeah, because I feel like sometimes we think that if you cut down a tree, maybe the carbon is released, but it seems like that's not the case.
Well, it will be eventually.
Eventually, okay.
Right? Because these things all break down, especially when we're in an urban environment. So there's an urban wood network, urban wood movement to try to utilize more of that wood for more traditional uses such as lumber. But not all of it is really the dimensions that can be used for lumber. And a lot of times we don't cut down our trees in our urban forest until they have big pockets of rot or decay.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, maybe they're utilized as mulch. But mulch is a wood product. Mulch does break down. And as things do break down, of course, they will start releasing some of that carbon. But if it's down by the soil, other plants can use that carbon that is as it's breaking down as well. So that comes back to the soil being such an amazing carbon storage device as well.
Okay, this is very cool. It definitely takes us beyond
together.
that first grade education of the carbon. Yes.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, and I'll just throw this one out there. Feel free to use it if you want. But trees in and immediately surrounding Wisconsin urban areas provide an annual energy savings to residents of about $80 million. And they remove about $45-50 million worth of that air pollution, particulate matter, and they store around $500 million worth of carbon.
Wow, those are some big numbers. Just to clarify, so when you say trees save us energy, are you referring to if your house is partially shaded during the summer, you therefore don't have to turn your AC up as high, or it doesn't have to run as often because you have shade on your house?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So avoided energy use, avoided energy cost.
Got it.
And to do the numbers exactly, it depends on which paper you're reading or whatever, but it's something like, for each large, tree that you have well placed in your yard, because you can place trees in places that aren't going to block the sun, so they're not going to, provide that same benefit. But it's something like, $30-ish, $40 on your annual energy bill, right? Maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but then you multiply that to how many households in your community, and you're saving a ton of energy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that's just one benefit.
Yeah.
Of those trees. So yeah, and it not only comes from shading, but here in Wisconsin especially, we heat our houses a lot in winter. It gets cold here. So trees can also block the wind, and mitigate those temperatures around our home so that we don't have to run our heat as much or turn our heat up as high to feel the same amount of warmth.
I see. I see. I feel like someone was showing me once like the perfect location for large pine trees because they don't lose their needles in the winter. So they help with that wind
Absolutely.
breakage. But then like if they're in the right spot in the summer, they can shade maybe the south side of your house or something. But yeah, I feel like you can really get in the weeds here and find out like how to optimize energy efficiency with your landscaping. Which, like, most people don't make that connection.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned before, too, there is, like, a LEED certification for landscaping for, you know, I don't know if it's particular for, like, businesses or governments. I don't think people can do LEED certified for their house, but maybe.
You can, yeah.
So, yeah, and that does take that in mind. And there are programs out there. There are free programs out there that people can use that, you know, you type in your address. It'll give you, like, a little satellite photo. You can map your house, and then it'll say, hey, if you plant a tree here, this is the, you know, better spot to put it.
Wait, that's so cool. We should link that in the show notes.
All right.
Very
I'll have to
cool.
see if it's still a current program, but I think it is.
Okay, awesome. So these energy savings from trees really makes me think about the heat island effect. Can you share a bit more about how trees play a key role in that?
Yeah, sure. And just to dive into it a little bit deeper, so like the heat island effect, right? So that's where our urban spaces tend to be warmer, right? And in some cases, like 20 degrees warmer than, you know, the rural area. And I experienced this, you know, if I go for a run, you know, I kind of live on the outskirts of a community, and as I get closer into town, I can definitely feel it.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, if you've never experienced the heat island effect, and that's just on such a minor level too, but you can literally feel that.
Yeah.
You know, so I find that very fascinating. But yeah, so these are, you know, urban built spaces. I keep saying urban, but really built spaces tend to have more heat. And why is that? It's because we have those materials like blacktop, asphalt, you know, bricks on buildings, and those are absorbing the heat. They're also reflecting and bouncing around the heat. And then on top of it, we tend to have less vegetation, period.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's where the urban forest comes in. It provides us some of that vegetation so it can do what vegetation does, which is grow. It shades areas. And then maybe even more importantly is the evapotranspiration,
Mm-hmm.
right? Big, super huge word, but really, it's not really trees sweating, but kind of the same thing. You know, as we sweat, it's evaporating from our skin, and that cools us. So when trees or any vegetation is doing that evapotranspiration, it does help cool those spaces. But I think more importantly, again, so like trees, they block shade-wise. I mean, they block anywhere between 70 and 90% of that solar energy coming in. Block or absorb it, really.
Wow.
And that prevents it, again, from reflecting up against a wall or sitting there, you know, you can fry an egg on the sidewalk kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a tree there, well, sorry, you may not be able to fry your egg today. One of the things I found really fascinating, I saw a Park and Rec magazine, in an industry magazine. It was talking about, like, down in Arizona, they're having to close playgrounds because of the heat. And I'm like, why are they closing playgrounds because of the heat? Are the kids like, oh, it's too hot? Which, yeah, that's part of it. But because the playground equipment gets so hot from the solar radiation that kids are getting burned.
Oh, no.
So they have to close them down so, you know, the liability is less. So again, when we plant a tree on solid surface areas like, say, playground slides, that can actually reduce the temperature of a playground slide anywhere from like 20 to like 45 degrees.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive. Now,
that's a huge jump.
Arizona was 120 at some points last year. And, you know, this is Wisconsin, but, you know, we've had very high temperatures as well. And we're seeing more of that. And so if we plant a tree out there, right, if it's 120 degrees, 40 degrees, let's say we get the max bend and we get 45 degrees off that playground slide, it's still going to be pretty hot.
Mm-hmm.
It may be too hot for kids to use. But I think the cool part is that it allows people and kids to be outdoors longer,
Yeah.
even if it is hot out, because they get the benefit from the shade just in general for themselves and the lower temperature, but then the equipment's safer.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I always remember seeing this picture where it said, like, where do you want to be on a hot day? And it was like a street that was lined with trees and had like a canopy over it. And then a street that was just like all concrete, all buildings. You didn't see any vegetation in sight. And you can just like feel how hot it would be if you walk down the street with no trees.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I go on, so I am a runner. I will confess to that. And when I go on a run, I will make a decision depending on the weather of the day. Am I going this way or that way? Because I know that one, there's a whole bunch more trees and it's going to be more shaded and cooler.
Yeah, exactly. I think we definitely need to cover stormwater and rainwater before we move on from this. So Any thoughts there on what role trees play in that?
Yeah, sure. So trees are pretty amazing. They really are designed like any organism, right, to get what they need, whether it be nutrients or water or oxygen or, in this case, CO2. And trees are designed to do that for water. And it really helps us out, especially in an urban area where we have a lot of these impervious surfaces. Trees will act, first off, the leaves will absorb some of the rain that's coming down. But more importantly, it slows the rain that's coming down. A lot of the rain, when it's hitting the soil or whatever, can cause soil splash. We lose nutrients. Those nutrients get in the waterway, things like that. So it slows the impact of the rain that's coming down. And then it can also channel it. It'll channel it down its branches and down to its trunk, and then out to its root flare into the soil that's in those areas. So if that soil is uncompacted and really great stuff, it will then absorb that rain that's funneled to it. Now, that doesn't always happen, unfortunately, because we do have various, again, more impervious surfaces in our urban areas. But in general, those are some bonuses that our trees can provide. That also then helps with the soil and channeling it there to have the rainwater infiltration, which then again the soil will filter that water, right? And it can recharge our our groundwater. And it all helps because trees are helping channel it and funnel it through their root systems as well. The other thing that trees can do, like when it comes to rain, if you think about it, the last couple of days here have been really great for that. We have that light rain. When those light rains start, and that's a bulk of our storms, tend to be lighter rains. We don't have too many of the gully washers, as we call them. And when we have those light rains, if you ever notice, it was the same thing as hey, I want to stand in the shade. Well, if you want to get out of the rain, where do you go? You stand under the tree.
Yep.
And you can see this because, the road will be all wet except for where the tree is. Right?
Yeah.
And there's dry spots. And so that can really, again, it helps let the environment that's there deal with the water. Instead of getting it all at once, the tree is going to hold on to water. First, it absorbs it. But it will also, there's a capacity for those leaves and branches and trunks to hold water for a certain period of time and then slowly release that as it reaches, its maximum capacity. And then that's why if you go under those trees after the rainstorm, you can still get dripped on because that tree is now releasing that rainwater. And again, the environment, that they're sitting in didn't have to absorb it all at once. It now gets to absorb it over a longer period of time.
I didn't realize that trees hold water in their branches and leaves.
Yeah.
They continue to fascinate me.
Yeah, you can sort of think of it kind of like as that sponge, right? Your sponge has a capacity and then eventually it'll start to drip out, right? And so the trees are kind of working like that.
Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about mostly a lot of environmental benefits tied to trees. However, I do know that trees are good for human health. And you had shared some really cool examples off air. Would you mind elaborating on those again?
So yeah, the health benefits that trees provide, it is, I can't even say it's really an emerging field anymore because people have been looking at this now for at least obviously more than a decade, but a lot of research has happened in the last decade. Just the incredible influences that trees can have on our health. Some of those things are, I can't say as simple as, but if you've had surgery, right, your recovery time in the hospital is reduced if you have a view of, a green space, trees outside your window.
Wow.
Along with that, you treat the nurses better. You're not as grumpy because your perception of pain is also lower, and therefore you're also asking for fewer pain meds. And all of those things can add up, right? How much does it cost to stay in a hospital per day? My guess is quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're out a day early, or whatever, that's a cost benefit basically directly to you or the insurance company. And then totaling all those things up, it's something like $11 billion in avoided healthcare costs.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I would venture to guess that doesn't even touch on a lot of the other things that, we're going to talk about here in a second, like, the forest bathing trends and things like that.
Okay, this is crazy. I had no idea. So I'm assuming when we had kind of talked about this in my last episode, which was our connection to nature. So we know from that episode that even just looking at nature makes us feel very calm inside. It's really good for our mental health. And then we know that our mental health is connected to our physical health. So I'm assuming that's how that connection works then.
Yeah, absolutely. That, but there's also some, not only just the connection with the mental health, there are physical changes that happen in our bodies from interacting with trees.
Whoa.
Yeah, right. And so the Japanese kind of, I would say, I don't know if they were the first to do it, but, and I'm going to probably mess this up, but Shirin-yoku, which is forest bathing.
Mm-hmm.
And what they would do as part of, intuitively, they're like, nature's a great place to be. We feel more restored, it's restorative and whatever. So they're like, let's study this. So they would, some of the early studies were really like, hey, let's take your blood pressure. Let's look for these various markers in your blood and things like that before you go into the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would do, various times, like maybe they're there for 3 days, maybe they're for 45 minutes, whatever. And then they would measure those markers again upon, exiting the bath, so to speak. And yeah, there were marked changes in certain things. For example, as you alluded to, right? So moods obviously are affected. So less stress, less anxiety, things like that, going hand in hand with less, lower blood pressure. The things that really blow my mind were things like anti-cancer proteins in the blood.
No way.
Actually increase.
Oh my gosh. Just from being in a forest.
Just from being, the immune system is bolstered, and part of that is, and so those specific things that I just mentioned, it is some of the volatile gases that the trees are putting out. They call them phytoncides, right? So it's like you walk into a pine forest in summer and you know what that smells like, right? So that's a phytoncide, right? And so and so I'm like, I should try this, right? Crush up some pine needles when I go to the doctor and smell them so that hopefully my blood pressure won't register so high. But I just find that fascinating.
That's so cool. So life hack, schedule in time to go into a forest weekly, monthly,
yeah,
and come out feeling physically and mentally refreshed.
Absolutely. And like I said, some of the studies were like, they sent people in for 3 days or whatever, but a lot of the studies were showing it does not have to be it's just kind of like exercise every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be, you have to like exercise, 4 hours a day to get any benefits. No, you can do it. You can exercise 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and it all is cumulative. You can get out in nature for, 15 minutes, 45 minutes, and you will receive some benefits. Another really crazy one, or one that I really like, is birth weight in children. Higher birth weights are related to better health outcomes throughout a person's life. And one of the things that has been studied is mothers, while they're pregnant, and their exposure to trees or treat areas. And if they live in an area in which, they're within, because scientists measure everything, right? Something like 300 feet of 10 trees. There's a statistically significant increase in birth weight just from having 10 trees, within your proximity. Crazy.
Like, do they have to be looking at them, or they're just in their proximity?
I would say, I don't know if they've done it down to if it's just I'm guessing a view of it would probably be, I'm not really sure if I'm being honest.
Okay.
But yeah, the other crazy thing is it doesn't have to be like these large, gorgeous, beautiful 100-year-old oaks, right? It can be a newly planted tree.
Whoa.
So maybe that's a really good gift, baby shower gift.
I love that. This tree's gonna grow with your new child.
Right.
That's really cool.
But then you have to take care of that tree to make sure that it doesn't,
Yes, and we'll get to that later in the episode. Okay, this is just mind-blowing, all the benefits of trees. So if you want to be healthier, it sounds like you should go look at trees or go into a forest.
Yeah.
And
the forest outside your door. It does not have to be a national
you don't have to go
forest
to the national park. You can go to your urban forest and receive all of these health benefits.
Yeah, really cool too. So there's a researcher out there, I'll probably get his name wrong too, but Cecil Cognac, and he proposed a rule, or been a rule that's been proposed. It's called the 330-300 rule. And basically it's kind of like, hey, we've synthesized we've looked at all these health studies, and whether proximity, they're all talking about having trees, or, are you looking at the trees, where are they? And if communities can sort of like aim for this 3-30-300 rule for trees, most, if not all of those health benefits kind of like will fall into line. And what that means is the 3 is having 3 trees that you can see from where you live or work, right? And then, or go to school, because you want students to have those benefits too. And then the 30 is a 30% canopy coverage in your residential neighborhoods.
Okay.
Right, because you're not going to get that in your industrial spaces. It's just probably not going to happen. But, and then 300 meters to a good quality green space.
Okay. From your workplace or your home or, okay.
Yeah. Typically, these are all like in relationship to a home, but
Gotcha.
I feel that they probably, maybe that's me stretching it a bit, but also apply to, say, work or school.
Okay. So I want to revisit the finances. So you'd already mentioned how we can save dollars on our utility bills because of the placement of trees around our homes or our workplaces. Are there any other financial benefits that we see from trees?
Yeah, there's some that are kind of direct and some that are a little bit less direct. But one that I hear a lot, right, and I think really applies to the municipalities that I work with are property values.
Oh, yeah.
And that seems to make sense, right? But there's some numbers out there too, and it really depends on the market and maybe when that study happened to be done. But to my knowledge, none of the studies say, hey, if you have trees on your property, it's lower property value.
Right.
If you have well cared for trees on your property, the studies are showing a range of anywhere from 3 to 20% increase in value of your property.
All right. That's significant.
Yeah. So if you're talking like in this market, I don't know houses are so expensive these days, but let's say $300,000 for a house, right? A 3% increase in your property value, that's 10 grand.
Yeah.
Not to mention if it does happen to be that, the 20%, which has to be, I would think some seriously cool specimen trees or something.
Yeah.
But $60K, like, dang. I mean, that takes care of the realtor fees.
It does.
But so that's so your property value is, worth more. For a municipality, and for the person who's trying to sell a home, your house is also, the houses with trees tend to be on the market fewer days. So that's always, you can sell them quicker, which is awesome.
I've noticed that too. I'm actually house hunting and there's these 2 homes. They're in like a new development area, literally 0 trees, and they've just been on the market. They're beautiful houses. They're clean, they're modern, but they're not selling probably because there's no trees.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's some other issues, but I don't know.
I would say it's the trees. And so then tying that back to the municipality itself, right? If your properties are worth more,
Higher property taxes. Yeah, more
right?
money for the municipality.
Absolutely. But along with that, so not only for property values, but things like, especially like downtown Main Street areas, there's a lot of redevelopment and stuff going on there because we want live, vibrant spaces in our communities. When we have those Main Street spaces or those courtyards and we have trees there, surveys have shown that people are more willing to travel further to come to those spaces because they want to be there. They spend more time there. And when people spend more time, they tend to spend more money, right? So it's really great for those businesses. But not only that, they're also willing to spend on the order of like 12% more for products.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So if you go to a downtown with 0 trees, you'll spend 12% less, maybe?
I would say you would be less inclined to spend money.
Okay.
I'll just get it online. I don't need to,
Yeah, like why go to this boring downtown with no foliage?
Yeah. And then for those downtown spaces too, like some of the things that, detract from them are those, empty storefront syndrome or whatever. And when we have these vibrant, treed downtowns, much like those houses selling faster, those stores fill faster.
I believe it.
So, it's kind of trees are a win-win there.
They are.
I know when I go to an outdoor cafe, when I go to a cafe, do they have outdoor seating? If they have outdoor seating, is it shaded?
Yep.
And I prefer natural shade from those trees. So yeah,
exactly.
It just adds to the whole charm of those places.
It really does. Yeah, I'm always looking for outdoor seating.
And then maybe I would say these are a little bit less direct that we can see sometimes, but when it comes to A couple of things. So surveys have also shown that both businesses and residents, when they are looking for places to live, not just neighborhoods, but communities, they are looking for communities that are more treed, period. And a lot of times, things that can help them do that is if, hey, if that community has is designated as a Tree City USA, that also often gives them an indicator that, hey, this community cares about their trees. They're doing something to manage those trees a little better than maybe the community next door. But employers have found the benefits to having, again, green spaces for their employees to go, or that they can see from their workspaces. And this is true for students as well, because people tend to focus better, right? Less anxiety, less stress. Along with that, we see less absenteeism,
Right.
Better scores on tests, more productivities for employees, higher graduation rates, higher for students, and higher retention rate for employees. All of those things are economic benefits to if we have people graduating from schools, it's clearly an economic benefit because we've got
Right.
more educated citizens out there. And then if we have less turnover in our employees, there's less training money, things like that. We have more productive, et cetera. So
This is all super impressive. So it sounds like what you're telling me is trees are the answer. If you have a problem, go plant a tree and it will maybe solve it. It might take some time, but
again, I'll say it'll definitely help. It's not going to hurt.
for sure. Yeah, I totally get it though. Like when I was in high school, I would love to look outside and just look at the trees. If those weren't there and I was instead looking into like a concrete courtyard, I would hate it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my chemistry was in the interior classrooms.
No windows.
No windows. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
the worst. That shouldn't exist anymore. That should be outlawed. You must have windows. I know for to get a LEED certification for a building, you have to make sure that I think all employees are able to look outside from their workstation. So they said like you can't put someone in an office with no windows or like in like a closet office. They need to be able to look outside from where they're working.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yay, LEED.
I think it's an optional credit, but it's like a really good one that you should pursue.
So, Rose, are you familiar with Emerald Ash Borer at all?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe if your listeners aren't, so Emerald Ash Borer came from Asia, and it's basically wiping out all of our ash trees here in Wisconsin, Midwest, Eastern, everywhere, everywhere it lands in North America. And just as far as the health implications, so as part of seeing all these ash trees die, studies have been done to say, hey, well, does it matter if this tree canopy is going away, even if because we can plant new little trees, whatever. And what they have found, I think it was 15 states were in the study, that when Emerald Ash Borer came through, and as the infestation progressed, the incidence of cardiac arrest and lower respiratory mortality increased.
Oh no.
It was directly associated with the growing EAB infestation.
Okay.
So that just sort of it ties it back to what are these trees doing, right?
Yeah.
Is it mitigating the heat, or what is it? But or getting the air particulate matter, but we lose those trees from Emerald Ash Borer, and it does have direct
Yeah.
health implications.
All right. Well, Brian, you've provided a really great comprehensive overview of all the benefits trees provide us. I learned a lot from that. As the next part of this episode, I wanted to move into the connection between trees and our built environment, which we've touched on a little bit. But I feel like when I think about urban trees and urban forests, I've seen both ends of the spectrum regarding how we build our infrastructure around the trees. So I have seen communities that are super careful about preserving the trees that they have. So they will be building a sidewalk and they might route the sidewalk around a tree so they don't have to remove it. Or sometimes I see even buildings being built around a tree, which is super cool. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I've seen forests be clear cut so that a new building or development can go in. And that breaks my heart. But I thought we could dive a little bit deeper into effective tree preservation in our ever-evolving built environment that keeps growing. So one of the most common things I observe in new construction is if a contractor is removing trees, cutting down trees, I do see that oftentimes they will replace them. Like if they cut down one big mature oak or maple tree, they will put in maybe like 20 saplings or seedlings to replace it. And I was just curious to know, what is the impact of the swap going from one big healthy tree to a bunch of baby trees?
Yeah, that's a really good point, a really good question. And unfortunately, as part of development, there are times when we need to do that. And if there's a tree there, it's great if we can think about it and think about planning around it if we can, or even a forested spot. And that has to happen early on in the process, though. It can't be an afterthought, and a lot of times it is. It's like, oh, well, we wanted to save that tree, but we cut all of its roots off, and we didn't know. So, I mean, I guess the point there is I understand that it does happen sometimes, and it needs to in certain circumstances as well. But yeah, the big point I think you're trying to get at there, too, is like, a tree is not a tree, right? And it's really important, and this is true for anyone who has trees in their yard as well. Keeping the big trees around is important, right? They provide us with so much more of those environmental benefits that we talked about in the beginning. I'm sorry to say, but if I just planted a new tree, that's, 8 feet tall and a couple inches in diameter, it is not providing the same as the, 26-inch diameter, 50-foot or 100-foot tall oak tree, with a, 50-foot spread. A lot of those benefits come from the leaf area that trees have.
Okay.
And a large tree will have 100 times more leaf area than small trees do. So even swapping it out with 20 trees, you are not catching the benefits of that one tree that you've just taken out of the environment. Now, say those 20 trees were to live for the next 80 years and get as big as the one that was there, sure. But that's going to take a lot of time. And quite frankly, getting those 20 trees to live in the urban environment for that long, that's a crapshoot.
Right.
A lot of our trees that are planted don't make it because, we don't do all the right things we need to.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're saying is, in the moment when you do your swap, you're not going to see the same amount of carbon sequestration, the same amount of absorbing the rainwater, and all those other benefits, simply because the tree canopy is not equivalent between the mature tree and maybe the 20 baby trees that are replacing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And intuitively, it probably makes sense. But I urge anyone to go outside and look at a newly planted tree and then look at a large tree sort of in the background. The little newly planted tree is worth one of the small branches on that big tree. I mean, you can just see it repeated, 100, 1,000 times in that big tree. And that one tree is doing all that. And here we've planted this little tree and we're like, man, we hope you get there so you can provide all those benefits for us too.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a long time coming. Again, and that is if it makes it through, because our urban environments are very, very harsh for our trees. Absolutely. And then mature trees in general, they do more because they are more. They're bigger. But just some numbers on that. They, can filter out 10 times more air pollution. 90 times more carbon sequestration because they are big and they are growing, right? And then they do have, like I said earlier, like 100 times more leaf area. So all those leaves being able to transpire more and provide a higher cooling, effect.
Gotcha. Okay, well that makes sense. So
definitely
whenever
not
you
a
can,
1 for 1.
Yes, whenever you can preserve, please do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question for you. Let's say you're a builder or a homeowner and you have this really beautiful mature tree in your backyard. And you're like, hey, I want to build a deck, but I want to build it in a way that it doesn't touch the tree and the tree can just, stay where it is. So let's say you bring out a construction crew and they do a really good job of never actually touching the tree with their equipment. The deck is built toward the house, away from the tree, and there's never any interference between those two. Once your project is done, can you safely assume that that tree has not been impacted by that project?
no, you cannot safely assume that tree has not been impacted
Really?
by that project. Yeah, and this is something we see often for terrace trees, or what we call, some people call boulevard trees. So these are the trees that are between the sidewalk and the curb.
Mhm.
We see this happen a lot. And that is, we're not building the deck by those trees either, but the equipment that is accessing the property is driving over the terrace. And again, they're not driving over the tree.
Yeah.
They're not running over the trunk, so to speak. But what we all forget about because we don't see it, are the roots.
Mm.
And the roots really are the no compromise. They are the unexpendable part of the tree, right? Trees can lose their leaves, they can lose twigs, they can lose branches. Heck, some of them can lose trunks and still thrive, live and grow. But losing roots, that's non-negotiable. You can lose, I take it back, you can lose some roots, but roots are extremely important to the tree. And the thing is, we don't see them, so we undervalue them. And we don't notice them. So again,
and we probably don't realize how far they extend out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the roots of those trees, I've read they can be anywhere from 2 to 5 times the height of the tree in all direction, but that's species dependent, soil dependent, things like that. But the safe assumption, a lot of people say, 1.5 to 2 times the height of the tree. But I would say on a conservative sort of standpoint, we talk about the drip line. And this works for, obviously wider canopy trees versus a narrow columnar type tree. But the drip line is, where the leaves stop and like all the area underneath it. So if we're at 12 o'clock, so where all the shade would be, that's considered the drip line. The roots in there are extremely important. And then the more roots we can preserve during a project, the better. And so back to that municipal example, again, they're not running over those tree trunks, but they're going in between the 2 trees. But in a terrace, the trees don't have a lot of places to put roots, so they're all throughout that terrace area. And as the skid steer is driving over the curb, it's impacting the soil there. It's compacting the soil.
I see.
Maybe breaking some roots, things like that. And those will all have detrimental consequences to those trees. There are some communities that if there is a construction project going on in a residential property, part of that is they have to put up fencing, some sort of barrier so that equipment cannot access the yard through the terrace. It has to go up driveways or sidewalk, carriage walks or things like that.
Okay.
So those trees are not impacted.
Gotcha.
So the same thing's true in your backyard, right? You may not physically have bumped into the tree or, needed to, remove the tree or whatever for your project, but there are roots. And especially if that tree, a lot of people want to put that tree, there's a tree close to your house and you want to put the deck there so you get the shade and it's all great. But yeah, if you put in that footing, right, we're cutting roots. Again, you're bringing that material to the backyard. You're driving over the roots. And what people forget, or quite frankly don't know, right, is soil compaction. And when we drive on it, even when we walk, even walking can do some compaction. Raindrops can do some compaction. Heavy equipment does a lot of compaction, especially if the soil is moist. And what that compaction does is it decreases the pore space in our soil. And the pore space is so important because the pore space is where there's oxygen and where there's moisture. 2 things that roots need to thrive and grow. And when we compact that soil, there's less room for oxygen, less room for moisture. And so those trees can't grow and thrive as they were. And the thing about construction damage is sometimes it takes a while for that really, because trees do store energy. They try to be resilient because they can't walk away from things. They got to be strong. So a lot of times those trees are going to hang out and maybe not show any signs of problems for 5 years, right? And so when you talk to a contractor, they're like, we don't have to worry about those roots. I've been doing this for 40 years and I've never lost a tree. Well, they've never lost a tree like the next day.
Right.
Maybe not even the next year. And so, no, they weren't blamed as the culprit. And it's, really not their fault necessarily either. It's just we don't know. We didn't know. Now we know better. So we should try to protect those things. So when we're doing a construction project like that, we need to think like where these roots might be. You can call in a certified arborist, and they can evaluate the tree's health. They can try to figure out where those roots are or are likely to be. They can even do things like air spading and actually locate certain roots.
Oh, cool.
They can help you decide which roots can be pruned and not be detrimental to the tree. And they can put up, they can do, tree protection plan so that the contractor needs to follow that so that things aren't damaged. And then offer recommendations like, how do we mitigate that? Well, if it's a simple access thing, you can put down sheets of plywood. or there are things that, there are
to distribute the weight.
yeah,
Okay.
of the equipment. And there are products out there, I don't know what they're called exactly, but they're other like rubberized sheets that a lot of contractors actually have. So why not use them? Because, they're trying to protect the turf too. Like they don't want to put ruts in the turf, but it goes beyond that. You don't want to destroy the roots and compact the soil beneath that either. Even something as simple as putting down a nice thick layer of wood chips that you'd want to, obviously rake up afterwards. They're a little bit messy that way, but then you can use them for the rest of your trees and they'll be happier.
Yeah. Okay. This is super interesting. So it sounds like the big takeaways are if your project is under the tree canopy, or if equipment ever passes under the canopy, you can probably assume you are damaging roots or compacting soil. So that could be maybe one big takeaway from this. Would another be, if the roots are damaged, you may not see physical damage until years down the line. And then third takeaway, if you want to mitigate issues like this or prevent them in the first place, hire a certified arborist or put down some sort of material to help distribute weight.
Yeah, at a minimum.
At a minimum, yes.
At a minimum, absolutely. And, there are things, so I would say arborists are called out all the time, right? 5 years after a project. And when we start to, analyze what might be going on with this tree, one of the questions a good arborist is going to ask is, has there been any construction in your yard? And then a lot of times they'll be like, oh, but it was over here or whatever. But the arborist will then start to glue that together and go like, okay, well, might be what we're dealing with here.
Right.
And then they can start to investigate. And there are things that, certified arborists can do to mitigate some of that damage. They can try to help with the soil compaction and things like that. But like in everything else, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
So we don't want to get too far along.
Okay, very cool. Well, those are some great tips for anyone who wants to do a at-home construction project, how to best preserve trees. So thank you for that. Now, let's say you're not doing any construction projects and instead you're like, I'm a homeowner and I want to plant more trees in my yard. You had mentioned earlier that these young trees have a not so high chance of survival in the urban environment. So what are some things we can do to have a higher likelihood of survival for trees that we plant?
So I read a super sobering statistic a month ago, and it was something like, with all these great like tree planting projects that are going in, it's something like, 3 in 5 of those trees are not making it.
Oh no.
Yeah. And so then you're like, well, what's the deal? Well, the deal is, there's aftercare once you plant a tree. You can't just plant them and forget them. And a lot of us, even our municipalities, that's the hope and dream when you plant a tree. I'm going to plant it, it's going to live forever, or 100 years or whatever. But no, trees, especially in our urban environments, they need us. They need us to care for them because this is not a natural ecosystem.
Right.
This is a highly disturbed ecosystem with all of these things going on, whether it's air pollution, whether it's salt spray from the road, compaction from construction projects, or just compaction when the house was built, cars running into them, whatever. There's a lot of things stacked up against urban trees. So what are the things that we can do to help them thrive the best they can in our environment? First off is planting them correctly in the first place. And what I mean by that is, well, first we got to get some good material, ideally from a nursery or whatever. But then when we plant them, we need to make sure that we're planting them at the right depth. And a lot of times, even if you're following the directions on some of the nursery tags, you end up planting them too deep because they're already too deep, say in the container or the ball, however you happen to buy your trees. And so the right depth to plant them is to what we call bear the flare. So there's a root flare on a tree. And if you ever drew, kids do this all the time. I ask kids to draw a picture of their tree and they'll draw it and they have that nice little root flare at the bottom. And if you look at a lot of trees that are planted in the urban environment, they don't have that. They look like telephone poles.
Just like go straight down.
They go straight into the ground. You're like, ooh, wait, where's that root flare I always used to draw, right?
Yeah.
That does exist, but it needs to exist up there at the surface, at the soil surface, right? It needs to be somewhere, up there. Why? Again, because the main reason is because those roots do need oxygen, right? And the further we go down in the soil, the less oxygen we have. The more compact the soil is, the less oxygen we have even at some of those shallower layers. And those roots really, they're in the top, most of our roots are in the top, foot of soil. They don't go, the deep taproot is only in a few species, like for our bur oak, for example, it's a taproot species. But say our maples and things like that, it's more like a wine glass on top of a saucer.
Oh, okay.
So those roots are really spread out. Again, why they're so far out in the, 2 to 5 times the height of the tree kind of deal. So planting them at the right depth.
Okay.
That's number one. And if you have a containerized tree, and I think I'll provide that for the show notes, there's how to plant a containerized tree, but the box cut is really, it's like when you're planting perennials, I always tell kids, like, you got to tickle the roots. You got to get them out of their, that container shape, because you don't want them, roots, once they start to circle, like to continue to go in a circle. And that's not what roots are supposed to do. Roots are supposed to get out into the environment so they can seek and find the moisture and the oxygen and the nutrients and provide stability. If they're just in that hole, they're a ball and socket. And we have seen trees fail like that.
Okay.
Ball and socket. So
Gotcha.
got to get those roots spread out. So at the right height, roots spread out. And then we need to water our trees. We can't forget about that, especially here in Wisconsin. We've had some really, really, really hot, dry summers.
Yeah.
And trees, even our mature trees, at some point are not going to be able to deal with, the drought and temperature. So even your big trees need a drink of water when it's really droughty. And I guess this one depends. Everyone's like, well, how much should I water my tree? Right? Especially a newly planted tree. Newly planted trees are trying to reestablish roots. They don't have a lot going on. They need to be watered pretty frequently.
Okay.
But also overwatering them is bad. So it's like, oh my gosh, just like houseplants, right? Same thing.
Exactly, yeah.
So the best thing to do is put your hand in the soil.
Do like
dig your finger
is it
in
moist?
there.
Is it dry?
Yeah, exactly. And if it's kind of sticky and wet, let's give it a couple more days, right? If it's dry and powdery, oops, I should have watered that maybe a couple days earlier.
Yeah.
But if it's cool and moist, we're good. Maybe I'll water tomorrow or something like that. There's a rule of thumb, an inch of water a week per diameter inch of the tree. If you get an inch of rain that week, great, taken care of. If you don't, then you need to provide that yourself. But what's an inch, right? So you can run your sprinkler or your soaker hose or whatever and try to calculate that by putting out a little cat food, tin or something like that. That's about an inch. And then time that and see how long it takes to get an inch out there. But gallon wise, if you're watering a small newly planted tree every, few days, because some of those will need that, you're only going to be putting down maybe 5 gallons of water each time.
Okay.
I would say on an order of 10 to 20 gallons per week is probably what you're looking at for a newly planted tree.
Okay, gotcha.
And again, frequency is going to depend on, is your soil drying out? Is it not? I have myself killed trees in my yard by overwatering them. I'm like, I'm going to water this tree because that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what I tell everybody else to do. But I didn't check the drainage.
Oh,
it was on top of the hill in my yard, so I just figured it was draining just fine.
Right.
No, and it took me 3 trees to figure out what the problem was.
Oh, no. And that's so sad because, some people don't water at all, and there you were diligently watering the tree. And then,
exactly.
Sad
So
day.
best thing to do, stick your finger in the soil.
Gotcha.
And you can use a screwdriver too, if you don't want to get your, fingernails gross or whatever. There are different ways to figure it out, but yeah.
Okay. Well, that takes the mystery out of it then.
Absolutely. Water when dry.
Yes.
Don't water when wet.
Okay.
But they do need water. And that's one of the best predictors of survival are, if trees have been watered or not.
Okay.
It's really that important for them.
So if you're going to do nothing but one thing, make sure you're watering.
Yep. And
at a
then
minimum.
I would say as a close second, because they kind of go hand in hand, is mulching those trees.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, mulch is so messy. I don't like the look of it or whatever. Mulch is, I dare say, essential, really, to get a happy, healthy, thriving, growing tree. And, not too much mulch. I do see the volcano mulching, and that's where you have the mulch piled up against the trunk of the tree, and it looks like a volcano. Nope, don't want that. You do want maybe 2 to 4 inches, again, depending on your soil type. I typically put down 4, sometimes I'll even go 6, I'll be honest, because then it compacts down. It'll settle over time.
Yeah.
And really you want your end amount to be 2 to 4 inches.
Okay.
So you can put down more to begin with. And then I keep it away from the root flare, a little bit out from the tree.
So it should be
itself.
right outside of that.
Yep.
It shouldn't be going up the trunk, which I see sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So quite literally, you're kind of making a donut.
Okay.
A little donut hole in the middle. Maybe, people say it should be a foot away, whatever. The whole idea is you just don't want that mulch coming back against the tree because it'll all settle and it shifts and rabbits run through there, whatever. And the mulch ends up against the the trunk of the tree. And then you just go out there when you're weeding or whatever, or watering, and you just pull the mulch back just to give it some breathing room. And there's a couple reasons for that. And you can develop some bark issues, and insects love to be there. Voles who love to chew on bark, like to hide in the mulch, that kind of stuff. But the other thing, and this also comes with planting trees too deeply, is girdling roots. So roots will come up into the mulch as well. And if you have it up against the trunk and your mulch is too deep or whatever, you can get roots growing up in there. And then eventually, if that root establishes and becomes a root that's going to keep and the tree's growing, those two are going to intersect eventually. Mm-hmm. And roots and trunks do not graft. And that root will strangle the tree.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And so that, again, is one of those main reasons why we want to plant that root flare up high. Because if you plant that root flare
it could be
down,
happening underground and you wouldn't even know.
It's absolutely happening underground.
Oh my gosh.
And you'll see this, like if you start walking down the street and look, trees have girdling roots. If you happen to see a tree that has a little bit of like early fall coloration on one side, look down. You'll see it's probably got something going on. I mean, it's dollars to donuts, got something going on with its roots.
Wow. Okay, so all of this is very important then.
Yeah.
And people maybe don't think about it. They're like, I'm going to plant my tree and it's going to take care of itself. But they need as much attention as your house plants, as your garden.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And for mulching, are we talking about wood chips or something else, compost?
Yeah, so organic material is best.
Okay.
Quite frankly, we do get some benefits. Here in Wisconsin, our soil pHs, at least in this area, are really high already. So if you're going to be putting limestone down for your mulch, you're adding to that pH issue, and that could not be great. And plus, then you do get kind of some reflective heat off of it. But it's still providing some of the other benefits, like, again, holding the moisture, and providing a little bit of temperature modulation and things like that. But organic mulches, and I just mean organic materials. I don't mean like USDA certified organic. So like wood chips, grass clippings, leaves, whatever. Those are all organic. And those are best. Why? Because the other benefit that mulch does is it starts to work into the soil by itself as it breaks down, and then it provides a lot more organic matter for that tree. And it simulates more of what a forest environment would be like versus super compacted soil with highly competitive grass.
Oh, yeah.
Grass is a greedy little guy. Okay, so that's the other benefit of having the mulch is it then kind of forces us to move the grass further away from our trees. Because, like I said, grass, it's sucking up the water, it's sucking up the nutrients, and it's stealing it from trees. They're in direct competition.
Okay.
And there are some studies out there that show, and I'm not sure the amount, but I can just tell you there is definitely a higher amount of root growth under mulch than there is under turf grass. It's something in the order of like 200 times.
Okay.
I mean, it's significant.
So another reason to put down mulch and make sure the grass is no longer growing around the tree. I guess how far out should the mulch go then? Or should the no turf zone be?
As big as you can make it.
Okay.
But obviously a lot of people don't like that or whatever. I typically, when I tell people, I'm like, do a 6-foot circle. So 3 feet from the tree in each direction.
Okay.
When you're starting out. If you have a mature tree, like a big mature tree, Dane County has done some of this with their oak trees in their parks, all the way, to the drip line and beyond. I mean, but at least the drip line, because then again, you're trying to, simulate more of a natural environment without the competition from the grass. And the other really super important thing, because people don't realize this either, but a major killer of a lot of our small, young urban trees, and even some of our more established trees, lawnmowers.
Really?
And weed whackers.
Like by physically touching the tree or?
Yeah, obviously not by mowing them over.
Yeah, okay.
But physically touching the tree, absolutely. So you see this in parks, like maybe the mower deck, hits the side of the tree and causes damage. You do that repeatedly, you're interrupting basically the circulatory system of the tree. It's no longer able to effectively take up the water and the nutrients. And you do that enough times and in enough places around that tree. Even once is bad, right? I mean, you're already then influencing or stressing that tree further. And once a tree is stressed, then it can fall victim to, insect and other fungal diseases, et cetera. And it's opening an infection spot. It's just like getting if we get a wound, right? You need to make sure it doesn't get infected. And, we usually just walk away from a tree once we hit it, or we throw dirt on it so nobody notices.
Yeah.
Right? And weed whackers are even worse because they tend not to, oftentimes when you weed whack around a tree, you may not see that damage initially. Sometimes you will. You'll be like, ooh, look, I nicked the bark and there's this really bright green right there or whatever. But if you've ever looked at like a mailbox post where somebody weed whacks a lot, right, that mailbox post tends to like whittle down to a little point and sometimes they end up breaking off and falling over.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing, and it doesn't even need to be that kind of physical damage, just the whipping of that cambial tissue damages it. And again, you do that over and over, it's developing its own, it's trying to grow and fix that. And there's basically the circulatory system of the tree, the vascular system, the cambial system is getting messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And bottom line, it can't do what it needs to do to thrive and be happy, and often falls either victim to that wound itself, or is so stressed out it can't deal with the drought that comes or the insect that comes or whatever else.
Yeah.
And we lose so many trees that way because we're just not thinking about it.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it myself, right? I'm mowing my lawn. I'm like, oh, I can get closer. I can take one more pass. Oh, I can't believe I hit my tree. It happens.
Okay.
If you have mulch, you don't have that option.
Okay, gotcha. So mulch is good for so many reasons. It like creates a zone where there's no lawn equipment, no grass growing. It releases nutrients, helps to keep moisture in.
Yeah, and regulates temperature. It's like a nice little cozy blanket.
Okay, so yes, I do agree with what you said earlier. Watering and mulching go hand in hand for the most important things to do. All right. Well, once I am a homeowner, hopefully this year, I will know exactly what to do when I'm planting a new tree.
Yeah. Well, and if you have questions, you can give me a call or check out any of the stuff in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you. We are officially at the end of the episode. Brian, this has been such a delightful conversation. Thank you for all your time and expertise today. Do you have any other concluding thoughts you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, a few parting thoughts for you. The big one is really take care of what you have. Use an expert, hire a qualified ISA certified arborist, and then help your community plant more and plant a diversity of trees. And that's even true for your own yard. If your neighbors have a bunch of something, plant something else. It's that easy.
Yeah.
But not only on your own property, but you can advocate for trees at your school, your churches, community spaces, even your places of work. And one thing to really keep in mind is that trees are awesome and resilient, but in these built spaces, they need us to care and advocate for them.
Awesome. Well, that is great closing advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you for listening to Sustainable Sun Prairie with your host, Rose Daly. I hope you enjoyed this episode and uncovered something new about sustainability. As always, you can subscribe to our podcast and listen anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and you can listen live on 103.5 FM The Sun, WLSP-LP, and on demand on the Sun Prairie Media Center app. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as our contact info, please visit the show notes. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.